and S12 section 25 of the Companies Act 1956. I also mean a society registered under the Societies Registration Act of the particular state in which it is registered. So any other kind of institution or trust, all are covered within the scope of the changes which are being now implemented. So every trust or institution which is now registered will have to make an application for re-registration or fresh registration rather within 3 months from 1st of April 2021. So 1st of April has already started. So within 30th of June, friends, all of us must make an application online in form number 10A, which has been already made effective. Recently, on 26th of March, friends, a notification was issued by the Finance Ministry where detailed rules and regulations were given regarding the manner in which the application has to be made for registration under the new rules, friends. So 10A is the form which has been now notified for making the registration in respect of an existing trust, and within 3 months, within 30th June, you must do the application. One good thing which they have done is, friends, if you make an application, then it is not a process of registration afresh as such. So therefore, it means that once you make an application, they are not going to make any kind of scrutiny, or you are not going to be called for by them. And simply when you make the application, you will be granted the registration under the new provisions without doing anything. The law itself provides, there is no doubt about that. The time also has been let down that within 3 months of your making 3 months from the end of the month in which you make the application, you will be given the approval under the new provisions by the concerned authority, which has also been specified. The CPC Bengaluru, they have created one designation of the person who will be doing this particular thing, and he will issue you the certificate which will be issued in form number 10AD, form number 10AC and form number 10AD. These are the two forms which has been specified in which the new registration will be granted. One more thing which has been specified is that you will be given a unique registration number, which is URN, which is a 16-digit number, which will be allotted to you like a permanent account number, where they will have certain mechanism for identifying the institution. So that 16-digit URN number will be your identification from then onwards. As far as like the CIN number in case of companies, so URN number in case of the trust or institutions which are registered. This is the mechanism as far as the charitable entities or trusts which are already registered under the Act and already enjoying the benefits of Section 11 of the Income Tax Act. Now a question may be arising in your mind that what will happen to the entities which may have made an application before 31st of March but have not been granted the registration till date. For them, friends, that also is taken care of in the Act itself, where they are saying that all the applications which have been made by the institutions before 31st of March, when the old provisions were there, new provisions have not yet come into effect, that will be deemed, the application will be deemed to have been made under the new provisions. Section 12 AB subclause 2 says all applications pending before the Principal Commissioner on which no order has been passed before the date on which the new provisions come into force shall be deemed to be an application made under subclause 6 of clause AC of Section 12A1. I'll come to this, friends. So they will be deemed to have been made under the new provisions as far as the earlier applications are concerned. So now earlier applications converted into new applications and fresh applications. Let us now talk of what about the new applications which you are now making, which is basically a fresh registration under the new provisions, friends. They are also taken care of. Here, also you have to file the application in form number 10A, which has been specified. And here, the application will be disposed of within 1 month from the end of the month. Only 1 month's time will be taken by the department. Department is running in a very fast way, friends. Gone are the days when there was a bureaucracy. We were all running from pillar to post for getting the registration from the director of exemption in 10 Middleton Row here in Calcutta, friends. All these things are thing of past. Once you have made an application, they have prescribed the timeline of 1 month from the date, from the end of the month in which you have made the application for getting the registration under the new provisions. Though, in case of when the application is being made as a fresh application, friends, and since they are taking very little time of hardly 1 month, what is being given to you is a provisional registration. It is not a final registration, so to say. They have made a mechanism of provisional registration so that you at least have some registration and you can do some sort of activities, start your activities without waiting for the procedural hiccups, etc. However, since it is only a provisional registration, the law has provided that provisional registration will be valid. And friends, before I tell you this thing regarding the earlier thing, when you make an application for a existing firm, which I told you that you will be given registration within 3 months, that will be valid for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, you have to make an application again under the new provisions. That is the law. Now coming back to the new registration, when you are given provisional registration, friends, the provisional registration will be valid for 3 years. So you can continue with the provisional registration without going for the regular registration, so to say. However, there is a catch that when you are required to make an application for a regular registration, even though you may be having a provisional registration, that is, there are time limits have been provided. When 6 months have elapsed from the commencement of the activities, friends. Suppose after getting provisional registration, you have started your activities of charity. You have started accepting donation, you have started doing activities of charity or whatever your objects are. Then you can do it for 6 months, but not beyond that, unless you have made an application for regular registration under the law. Or when at least 6 months are about to be left. So if you have continued with the provisional registration for 2.5 years, then it is time for you to make an application for registration as a regular registration. Otherwise, you cannot continue. So this is the mechanism which is provided for new applicants who are given provisional registration. And again, those who are given provisional registration, they will be given the final registration again on application. Once you make an application, having already got the provisional registration, then you will be given registration for 5 years. That final registration which will be given to you, here the time limit which has been provided is 6 months from the end of the month in which application is made. So they are taking time of 6 months when they are giving you the final registration in case of already you are given provisional registration, and when you are applying for registration again after 5 years, at that time 6 months time limit is provided. These are the rules which are mainly, these are the broader provisions as far as the registration under the new rules is concerned, friends, which one should keep into mind. Now, one more thing which they have done is that these provisions which I have just now told you, exactly the same provisions will apply as far as section 80G is concerned. Same thing. The time limit same, the manner of application same, the approval, the provisional approval, the 5-year time limit, all these provisions are same as far as section 80G is concerned. The form is also in fact same, 10A. Earlier there were two forms, friends, 10A and 10G, but now this single form is there, though there are options that once you are making the application under the for registration, then you have to select the option for registration, and if you are filing the form for approval under 80G, then you have to select the option for approval under 80G. That mechanism is already in place on the website of the Income Tax Department, where the information which is being called for is not very different from what was being called for under the earlier provisions, friends. Rule 17A, which dealt with this, has been amended, and Rule 17A here deals with this aspect, friends, that what are the documents which are required to be enclosed at the time of submitting the form, which is basically the normal form. It is not very time taking, and only thing is that it is required to be digitally signed. When you are submitting the form, it will have to be furnished under digital signature or through electronic verification code, which we are all aware. There is no big deal in that, friends. So that is, friends, as far as the registration provisions are concerned. Now, friends, the time limit also I have explained you that now a question must be arising in your mind that what about the power of the commissioner to verify to the activities of the trust, or whether to grant the registration or not, whether to grant the approval or not. All these things are concerned. They are there also, friends. When after having got the provisional registration, when you apply for the final registration or the 5-year registration, at that time the commissioner can look into two things, friends. What are those two things? First is, he can call for such documents which he feels for the purpose of making inquiry about the genuineness of the activities of the trust. That is one. Secondly, he can also call for the documents to satisfy himself that the compliance of requirements of such other law by which the trust or institution is governed has also been done, friends. In this regard, friends, there are many cases where the courts have held that the action which the commissioner or the director of income tax which can take for refusing to register on the ground of genuineness of activity of the trust is concerned is a very limited kind of a scope which is given, friends. Often it has been seen under the law when the physical hearings were taking place at 10 Middleton Row, that commissioners were asking us that you give us what are the activities you have done. You show me the bank account. You have to show at least that you have done some transactions of charity, without which we will not give you the approval. These are the demands which were being made. But for this, friends, there is a Calcutta High Court decision. I don't remember the citation. It's a very good decision which came about 2 years ago, where Calcutta High Court rightly said that how can you ask for the details of activities undertaken by the trust at the time when you have been approached for granting the registration, because the unless the registration is done, the trust cannot seek donation from the parties. For the purpose of taking donation, only the registration is being sought. So how you can say that unless you show me the activities of the trust, I will not grant you the registration? It is illegal. The Calcutta High Court very good decision is there, and there are Supreme Court decisions also. So the commissioner or these now under the new provision CPC Bangalore will have no reason to call for any documents at the time of new registration, friends, to satisfy. The only thing which they will need to satisfy, of course, is that the document by which you have been created, the trust deed by which you have been created, or the provisions of any other act. Suppose if you are a company under Section 8 of the Companies Act 2013, then they may look into this aspect, that company has been properly constituted as per the provisions of the Companies Act. The memorandum and article of association of the company under Section 8 must not contain any disability as far as Section 8 company is concerned. Like most of the time, one mistake which is always done by people I have seen while constituting a trust or a company or anything, that they don't contain any provision whereby how the dissolution will be dealt with. So how if the trust is dissolved or if the company is wounded up, then what will happen to the funds of the trust or the company? Sometimes what happens, these are not written in the trust deed, and therefore they require an amendment to be made to the trust deed, that unless you write that the trust will not give any benefit to the trustees or the settler, but it will be given to a similar trust with similar objects, they say that we will not grant you registration. Similar provisions have to be there in the company or any other rules governing the institution by which is seeking registration, friends. So these are the very, very broad provisions which can be looked into, but not the detailed. They cannot ask you the activities, that they cannot ask you that show me the activities which you have done. All these things cannot be called for, and I am hopeful that the time limit which has been given by them, 1 month for the new registration, 3 months for the existing trusts which are making application for 5 years registration, will be complied with by them in earnestly, and there will be no reason for anybody to complain which were being coming under the physical dispensation, friends. Of course, when you make an application for registration after 5 years, at that time they will have the reason to look into the aspects of genuineness of the activities which are being carried on by you. Whether you are doing the activities or not, whether you are only making accumulation of funds, year after year you are building up bank balances, earning interest, filing form number 10 for accumulating the income to be spent in next 5 years, and you are building huge corpus, then friends, they may object that you are not doing any activity whatsoever. But otherwise, friends, they will have no opportunity to do anything, friends. And I think basically that whatever the provisions which have been enacted, the changes which have been done, friends, they are not very cumbersome, so to say. It's a simple form, and the information which is being asked for is also very simple. And the only thing which I will, out of my experience, I am telling you that since everything is being now done by computers, not by individuals, not by the babus and the clerks sitting in Middleton Row, and computer does not differentiate between me and you. Computer, we all know, garbage in, garbage out. So therefore, you must devote lot of time while filling in the form, friends. You must not take it very lightly that ये 10A form जो है ये कोई भी भर देगा यार, 10A form भर दो. अब 10A फॉर्म भरने में फ्रेंड्स आपने अगर एक लाइन भी इधर उधर कर दी, कंप्यूटर जो है ही डजंट अंडरस्टैंड, उसको इंस्ट्रक्शंस हैव बीन गिवन, it will only follow the instructions which have been given to the computer, and he will accordingly put flags, and on that basis your application may be liable to be rejected. So friends, I will advise that most of the time we must be given in filling in form number 10A. A question is cropping. Please advise key areas in form 10A, friends. Though question and answer will be done later on, but I can, as an example, I can give you an illustration that form number 10A, when you are filing, friends, seeking application for registration of a trust, the form 6 details about the nature of the trust. If you accidentally put yes against religious, then that means that you will become ineligible for getting approval under section 80G, because a religious trust is not eligible to get approval under section 80G of the Income Tax Act. Now I am not sure, I have not tried myself, these are all procedural matters. There must be some kind of inbuilt checks in the form itself, that suppose if you are making an application for approval under section 80G, then, and if you have tick marked religious, then the form should not accept your application. There should be inbuilt mechanism like this in the form, I believe. But if it is not so, friends, you have to select the activities by filling in the form very meticulously, that the form, the information which you are filling in is correctly given, friends. Otherwise, your application is likely to be rejected. Then friends, 10A, let me give you a few more examples. 10A form, what does it calls for? It calls for PAN number, the nature of activities. Nature of activities, charitable, religious come charitable. There are a lot of institutions like Sri Rani Sati Ji Mandir, I am a trustee. We do charity, we have a temple, one of the largest temple in the world. So we are doing religious activity, we are doing charitable activity also. So we are religious come charitable. There may be an institution which is purely religious. They are not doing any activity other than religious. Their job is to maintain a temple. The temple has got collections from in the hundi and other form of collections, and it is spending that fund for the upkeep and maintenance of the temple. That is a purely religious activity and charitable. And friends, here I think here I will tell you one more thing, friends, because I have seen lot of institutions who are at the first plus may appear to be religious, but they are not really religious. How you must be thinking? Suppose I have got a institution where I am teaching the spiritual aspects of the culture of India. I am teaching the various Vedas, the various epics of our Hindu Shastra. And in that complex, I have got, say, a small temple of Ganeshji. I have got a small temple of Shankarji. So will you call it a religious institution, or will you call it a charitable institution? Though that is an altogether different concept, that what is the meaning of religious, what is the meaning of charitable, that has also been discussed in detail, friends, by various decisions of Supreme Court itself. What at first blush appears to be religious need not be religious. If something is connected with spiritualism, then you should rather say that it is not religious, but it is charitable. You should try to say that I am a charitable institution, I am not a religious institution. Religion, simply because a temple is there, a small Ganeshji temple is there, that does not mean that it becomes a religious temple. It becomes a religious institution. In fact, I have seen some arguments where it has been argued that the god of Ganesh is being followed, is being worshipped by people across the world, irrespective of the caste of the person. I have seen, friends, in fact, I can tell you that like Rani Sati Mandir, Junjunu, I have seen lot of Muslims going regularly to the temple and praying before the goddess, friends. So therefore, friends, this is though altogether a different concept, but you must select the activity of religious or charity or charitable come religious very meticulously, and based on your existing, if you see your existing section 11 registration, in the earlier registration, they used to classify that you are a charitable institution, you are a religious institution. So you should try to see what is the classification that has been given to you in the earlier registration, and then try to select this, friends. Then there are other normal things are there, friends. As far as the form is concerned, details about the donation, etc. All these things are there. So friends, coming back to our discussion, when you are filling in the form number 10, you must do it meticulously. Don't leave it to a junior, or even if it is left to a junior, you please see to it that he is adequately given the background of the form which he is filling in. Often we give it to article clerks, but we must give him the background. We must explain him the provisions so that he understands what he is doing before simply filing in the form in a hurry, friends. You must not do it, friends. That is. Now, friends, some of the changes which has been made by the Finance Act of 2021, these changes which I spoke with you, they were in fact made prior to the Finance Act of 2021. The only implementation is done with effect from 1/4/2021. Some of the changes was made by the Honorable Nirmala Sitharamanji while presenting the finance bill on 1st of February. One important change which was made in 1023C, where the educational and medical institutions, if they had income, if their receipts were up to ₹1 crore, their income was exempt under section 1023C 5 or 6 of the income, 3A, D and E. That limit was increased to ₹5 crores, friends. 3A, D and E. So that is a welcome move which was made by Nirmala Sitharamanji, that it has been made to. So if you are having an institution, say if you are running a school which is not for profit, a not-for-profit school, if you are running where the receipts are up to 5 crores, then your income is exempt under section 1023C 3AD and hospital 3AE. This was the amendment which was made in the finance bill. Another amendment which was made in the finance bill, which is now part of the act, friends, is a very important amendment. Again, this is going to lead to, I think, nightmares, I will say, for the charitable entities. And particularly when one is filing the return, when one is preparing the audited balance sheet, I advise all of you, friends, that when you prepare the audited balance sheet of a institution which is enjoying the benefit under section 11 for 31st March 2021, you must see that your application of income, your income from general funds, your income from corpus fund, etc., all are clearly laid out, friends. Because if you do any mistake, then you are likely to be caught by the changes which has been made, and there is likely to be adjustments from CPC in future, friends. So while preparing the balance sheet of this year, please make it sure that you do it meticulously, friends. Why? Because the government has now made it mandatory, friends. 11(1)D of the Income Tax Act, all of you must be aware that if any person gives you a donation with a income in the form of voluntary contribution made with a specific direction, that they shall form part of the corpus of the trust or institution. All of us are aware that if you get donation with a direction that it is to be treated as a part of your corpus, then that is exempt under section 11(1)(d) of the Income Tax Act. That does not come into calculation of 85 for the purpose of 85%. You don't have to spend 85% of that amount for being in compliance of section 11 of the Income Tax Act. So what the government has said when they amended this provision in the Finance Act, they said that what is their experience, that some people were making application of income out of the amount which they received by way of corpus donation, and therefore they were taking double benefit, because section 11(1)(d), as I told you, makes the corpus donation as exempt. So it is already exempt in your hands. You don't have to spend 85%. Now, after having claimed this amount as exempt, you are spending 85%. You are required to spend 85% of your that year's income. That 85% you are spending out of your corpus which you have received, and that you are claiming as exempt again. So government is saying you are claiming double benefit, friends. That is why they are saying that you have to, when 11(1)(d), they have made one amendment that 11(1)(d) exemption will be available provided the corpus donation which you have received has been invested as such as per the provisions of section 11(5) of the Income Tax Act. So what does that mean, friends? That means that you will have to give a separate account of corpus fund and the general fund, basically. Generally, what we have been doing, I have not seen many trusts making separate account of corpus and general. We prepare one balance sheet only, where the corpus donations are directly taken to the trust fund and they are not separately shown as such. However, friends, what the government now wants you to do is to show it clearly that corpus donation which you have received have been invested separately as per section 11(5) of the Income Tax Act. What does that mean? Suppose if you have received a check for ₹1 crore from a person where he has said that this amount is to be treated as a corpus donation, then government wants that this 1 crore should be separately invested as a corpus donation. Rather, it can be earmarked that it is a corpus FD. Now, what may happen, that suppose when you have received a check for ₹1 crore and you already had one bank balance of 1 crore earlier, so now you have 2 crores. Instead of making a separate FD for 1 crore, you make a FD for 2 crore. So therefore, friends, you will have to now show that out of these 2 crores, 1 crore was from the corpus fund and 1 crore was from the general fund. It will get mixed up, friends. You will have difficulties in explaining the compliance of the provisions, friends. Though it is also a compliance, I will say that it is a compliance. You have made a FD of the corpus and it is as per section 11(5) of the Income Tax Act, no doubt. However, friends, it is a very simple example I gave you. There will be difficulties in explaining the compliance, friends, that is the issue. So it is in one's own interest now, from now onwards, to have separate rather account for corpus and separate account for general, so that it can be easily explained that I am in compliance. I have not made any kind of non-compliance, as far I have not spent any amount out of corpus, and I have not claimed 85% out of that, friends, in order to show that. Now, one question may be arising, friends. Suppose I have received a piece of land from a person. I have not received I have received a piece of land as donation in a charitable trust. How do I make investment under section 11(5) of the Income Tax Act? So friends, in that case, in my opinion, if you have received any piece of land, and the fact that it is a land is a immovable properties are prescribed mode of investment under section 11(5). So it will be sufficient compliance. If the land is with you, it is section 11(5) compliant itself. There should not be any issue, friends. So this one change which has been made, and what they have said, that if you make any expenditure out of the corpus donation in a particular year, then that will not be treated, that will not be allowed to be treated as application for the purpose of 85%. However, suppose if in a year you have made some expenditure out of corpus, so your corpus is getting reduced and it is not being allowed to be treated out for the purpose of 85%. But they have said that if in subsequent year, if you replenish that corpus from your regular income, then to that extent it will be treated as application of income for the purpose of 85% in the next year when you have replenished the corpus out of your current year's income. That provision they have made. So this is as far as the corpus donation is concerned, the change which has been made. Second amendment which has been made is regarding the amount which is spent out of the borrowings. Friends, the trust, as of all of you know, we can maintain the accounts on cash basis, we can maintain the accounts on mercantile basis also. There are a lot of trusts which are doing on mercantile basis also. And in the mercantile basis, friends, what happens, suppose if you have made an investment which is a cumulative investment, and where the interest is coming to you after, say, the period of maturity, which may be 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, or even 5 year. So you don't get the regular income in that case. In such a scenario, in the case of mercantile basis of accounting, when you are, say, accounting for the interest accrued, in that case, friends, we have been doing that the trustee may give loan to the trust for the purpose of spending, and that was being shown as application of income. And later on, when the loan was being repaid, that repayment of loan if I have taken this original money which I have spent out of the loan, if I have taken that as an application of income, when I was making repayment of the loan, I was not taking that as an application of income. So as far as the loan is concerned, what they are saying now is that if you have made any application of income by borrowing, then that amount will not be eligible to be treated as application of income in such year. It will be treated as an application of income only in the year in which you make the repayment of that loan out of your income. That is another change which they have made, friends. In this regard, friends, there is already a circular also of CBDT, where CBDT itself has said that if you have borrowed money and subsequently if the borrowed money is repaid by the trust, then that repayment of money will also be treated as an application of income. This is in fact same thing, but they have now specifically barred that if you have made any application of income out of borrowed funds, it will not be treated as application. It will not be allowed to be treated as an application of income. So friends, this is one important point which again you should take into account while preparing the return of income of an institution or a trust, which is going to affect, friends, all of us, friends. Then, friends, this is the second important amendment which has been made. Third is, lot of trust, what they have been doing, that if they have spent excess spent, suppose my income was 1 crore, I made an expenditure of 1.5 crores. So I made an excess expenditure of 50 lakhs. Though I was required to, I was not required to. So in this case, what we used to do is, we used to take benefit of this excess expenditure in subsequent years. That application, we are used to claim this as an application in the subsequent years. When suppose in the subsequent year, if my income is 1 crore, but my expenditure or application of income is only 50 lakhs. So in that year, my application is falling short of 35 lakhs because 85% I am required to spend. So I used to carry forward the earlier year's excess application and claim set off in this year. That was being allowed, friends. So there are a lot of decisions of court which have held that this is allowed. There is nothing untoward in this. But now, friends, it has been specifically said that you will not be eligible to claim this excess expenditure which you have made in 1 year as application in the subsequent year. This is another change which has been made in the budget, friends. Then, friends, another amendment which has been made is, the government is now going to introduce the tracking mechanism, friends. As far as donations are concerned, when you are getting the donations from the, when you are registered under 80G, when you are approved under 80G, friends, then till now, friends, we had the luxury of issuing the receipts for receipts which we used to issue for getting the donation. We devised our own format in the best possible manner. But now, friends, the lawmakers have introduced a form number 10E. Friends, 10E has been introduced. 10BE rather, sorry. 10BE is the form in which you have to issue the receipt for donation which you have received under section 80G. That format is given in the rules which have been made on 26th of March 2021. It is in public domain, and this certificate which is issued in form number 10E, you have to give your unique registration number, you have to give the details of the order number, etc. All this normal information you are required to give, friends, in this certificate. So please stop issuing this certificate which you are doing now. You have to follow this format as prescribed under the law in form number 10BE. And you are also required to file a return of donation which you have received in pursuance of Rule 18AB, which has been enacted in form number 10BD. 10BD is the form in which you will have to file a return of statement of particulars. They have said that it is a statement of particulars to be filed by the reporting person under section 80G5 of the Income Tax Act. This is required to be filed within 31st May of the next financial year. So the first return under this form will be filed next year. Within 31st May you have to file. And the donation certificate also, which I told you just now, that is also required to be given within 31st May. Though I think that in normal course, the certificate will be given as and when the donations are received. The trust will issue the certificate as and when it is receiving, though the compliance of the annual statement will have to be done only once in a year in form number 10BD in pursuance of rule number 18AB. I'm not going into the details which are there in public domain, friends. So what the government is now basically going to do is they are going to track the donations which are given. They are going to track and they will put this information in form number 26AS also, I think, that this is the amount of donation which you have given and which you are eligible to claim as deduction under section 80G of the Income Tax Act. It will be auto-populated, I think, and the computers will cross-verify the details from your return of income when you are claiming the deductions for under section 80G as per the provisions of the Act, friends. These are the, friends, the main, so to say, the changes which has been made in so far as the charitable trusts or institutions are concerned. Now I will come to the second topic, which is the Finance Act of 2021. That what are the major amendments which have been made, friends. I will now touch upon those. Thereafter, we will have question answer session. So, friends, after the budget was pronounced in the month of February, 1st February 2021, and the final budget which has been passed by the Lok Sabha on 23rd of March 2021, it will be seen, friends, that some major changes has been made by the Honorable Finance Minister, which I think propriety demanded that they should have been routed through the finance bill only, which they have not been. And to that extent, I will say that the professionals and those who are affected, friends, did not have the benefit of going through the mind of the lawmakers in the form of memorandum explaining the finance bill and the usual discussion that could have been done in between the time when the provisions are introduced on 1st February and the passage of the bill, friends. Because though these amendments have been made by discussion in the Lok Sabha, the ultimate lawmakers, the members of parliament, friends, but the opinion of public at large has not been allowed or has not been taken as far as these amendments which have been introduced subsequent to the pronouncement of the finance bill. I'll concentrate on few important changes, friends. The first important change, which is going to affect most of the SSCs, so to say, is the manner in which the partnership firms are nowadays assessed, friends. As all of you know, as far as partnership firms are concerned, the Income Tax Act does not distinguish between the firms which are registered under the Indian Partnership Act 1932 and the Limited Liability Partnership Act of 2008. The definition of firms include both the partnerships. Though there is a conceptual difference between both the partnership, as all of you know, that the LLP is basically a body corporate with perpetual succession, whereas the Indian partnership is not really so. And to that extent, I think there are difficulties are there, and there will be difficulties in the coming years. Notwithstanding that, friends, one issue that was being subject matter of litigation before courts and tribunals, friends, was regarding the manner in which the changes were being done in the partnership. So before going into the changes itself, friends, first let me tell you that what the change tries to address is. As all of you are aware that in case of a partnership firm at present, when there was a change in the, when there was a say reconstitution of partnership, reconstitution of partnership can be done in what manner, friends? The reconstitution can be say when some of the partners got retired from the partnership firm, leaving other partners. That is a reconstitution of partnership. When there is a change in the manner of sharing of profits without there being any change in the partners, that is also a reconstitution of partnership. When a partner retired from the firm, when a partner resigned from the firm, it is a reconstitution. When upon death of a partner, his legal heirs are introduced as a partner, it is also a reconstitution. So these are various modes of reconstitution of a partnership firm, friends. And then there is of course dissolution of a partnership firm when the partnership is dissolved as per the partnership instrument. If it is a partnership at will, it could have been dissolved at any time. So what was the tax implication of all these activities, friends? If you see the law, friends, the decision of Sunil Siddharth Bai, reported in 156 ITR page 509, is a landmark decision. All of you, friends, must, for your academic knowledge, must go through this judgment of Sunil Siddharth Bai, which was instrumental, so to say, friends, in bringing one amendment in the legislation as far as partnerships are working. Though it is now going to the benefit of the assessees, I will say, because section 45(3) of the Income Tax Act, if you see, all of you must be aware, this deals with introduction of capital by a partner in a firm. The present changes which have been made has left this amendment, this particular provision unamended. 45(3), what is the provision at present, friends? 45(3) says that if you make any introduction of a capital in the partnership firm, say if you introduce your land in the partnership firm, then it is treated as a transfer from you to partnership firm, and for the purpose of calculation of capital gains in your hand, the price at which the land is recorded in the books of the firm will be deemed to be the consideration in your case. And therefore, friends, this provision is being misutilized, I will say. This provision is being used as a tax planning for shifting your tax liability to the partnership firm, because the law gives you that leeway, so to say. So you are recording the asset in the books of the firm at whatever value you like, because that is treated as your consideration, and therefore you are shifting. Basically, it amounts to shifting of your tax liability to the liability of the firm. That 45(3) is one provision which is there in the statute book, which is not getting amended by these amendments, which I will be explaining to you. And second is 45(4) of the Income Tax Act. 45(4), all of you are aware that when there is a distribution of capital asset by the partnership firm to the partner on dissolution of a firm or otherwise, then the provisions of section 45(4) says that the capital gains arising on such distribution will be charged as the capital gain in the hands of the firm. That 45(4) is already in place in the statute book. However, in spite of there being 45(4) on the statute book, friends, people have got away without paying any taxes and getting substantial money on account of appreciation in the value of the assets held by them through the partnership firm. And that is what has caught the attention of the Honorable Finance Minister, I think. Now what was happening is basically, friends, that suppose in the example I gave you, when you are transferring your land to the partnership firm, and the partnership firm records that land at whatever value you like. Suppose your cost of the land was 1 lakh. You recorded the land in the books of the partnership firm at 1 lakh only. And therefore your consideration would have been deemed to be 1 lakh only as per section 45(3), and you are not liable to pay any capital gain tax as per section 45(3), since you have not received any consideration in excess of the amount which you have paid. Now, this partnership firm, after having received this land from you at 1 lakh, whose market value was 1 crore, it revalues this land at 1 crore. So what will happen on revaluation, friends? The land will become 1 lakh land will become 1 crore. And 99 lakhs will be the revaluation reserve, so to say. And you will, as suppose if in that firm there are two partners with 50% share, then one partner will be eligible to get 49,50,000 on account of this revaluation. His capital account will be credited with 49,50,000, and suppose after 1 month a new partner is introduced in the firm, and the person who has introduced the land is retired, and he is given 49,50,000 on account of the balance in his capital account. What does this mean, friends? This in effect means that you are transferring your land to the new person who is being introduced as a partner in the partnership firm. If you pierce the wheel, if you lift the corporate veil, then this is what is happening. But the transaction was held to be tax neutral by Orchid. There is a judgment of Calcutta High Court, I think, Tribunal, Orchid Nirman Private Limited or some. There is one judgment of Calcutta Tribunal, and there are other judgments. It's not that only Calcutta Tribunal, etc. So there are Mumbai Tribunal judgments also there, Bangalore Tribunal judgments are there, where they have said that what you are being paid is cash upon your retirement, notwithstanding that it has been done upon revaluation. Section 45(4) was held not to be applicable. In fact, there is a Karnataka High Court judgment reported in 359 ITR page 83, which has been subsequently followed by Bombay High Court also. So this is one example which was being, the way the tax planning was being done through the medium of partnership. Then section 45(4) itself, friends, as I told you, deals only when you are transferring capital asset. So the courts have held that unless you transfer any capital asset, the question of applicability of 45(4) cannot arise. If you are transferring only cash, if you are giving money only to the partner, then you are not transferring any capital asset, and hence no capital gain tax liability can arise in the hands of the firm under section 45(4). So therefore, friends, and another thing is, say, when stock in trade is being given to you, in the earlier example, suppose capital asset is given to you and stock in trade is also given to you. So we used to argue that 45(4) deals only with the distribution of capital asset, not with the stock in trade. It does not deal with the transfer of stock in trade. And there is in fact a judgment of Bombay High Court in Prasoon Joshi, I think, where section 28 subclause 4 was applied by the assessing officer. Section 28 subclause 4 deals with the value of any benefit which has been received. in course of business, that was held to be not applicable by Bombay High Court when stock in trade was transferred, I think, friends. So in order to plug all these things, all these loopholes, the government has enacted Section 9B of the Income Tax Act. A new Section 9B has been enacted, and mind it, friends, the place where Section 9B has been introduced in the Income Tax Act, the 9B has been inserted in the chapter dealing with basis of charge. It is not inserted in the sections dealing with computation of income under Section 14(2). We all know that there are 5 heads of computation, but this 9B has been introduced in the chapter dealing with basis of charge, which contains sections like 5, which deals with the charge, Section 8 dividend, Section 9B tax on transfer of property to the capital asset or stock in trade by a partnership firm to the partner. This is dealt with by 9B. Section 45(4), which I was discussing, has been revamped. That is second amendment. And third is 48 subclause 3 has been introduced. So let me, friends, briefly discuss what are these provisions. Section 9B has been enacted, friends, to provide that if the partnership firm gives any capital asset or stock in trade or both to a partner on dissolution or reconstitution of firm. So they have used the word reconstitution as against the word dissolution or otherwise used in Section 45(4) now. So if a partnership firm gives any capital asset or stock in trade to the partner on reconstitution or dissolution, then it will be liable to be taxed in the hands of the firm as business income or capital gains, as the case may be. In case capital asset is transferred, it will be capital gains. In case business as stock in trade is transferred, it will be a business income, in the manner as computed in as provided in Section 9B of the Income Tax Act. And they have clarified the meaning of reconstitution also. What is reconstitution? Reconstitution is one or more of its partners ceases to be partner. So if there is a retirement of partner, one partner retires, two partner retires, then one or more new partners are admitted. However, at least one existing partner should be there. And the third is all the partners continue. There is no change in the partners as such, but there is a change in the share of profit of the partners. Then that is also a reconstitution of partnership. So friends, virtually whatever I discussed just now was being done will no longer be possible for the partnership firms without inviting the tax under Section 9B of the Income Tax Act. When they transfer capital asset or stock in trade to a partner of the firm in settlement of the amount which is payable by the firm to the partner for the balances which are lying in the capital account of the partner, friends. This is Section 9B. And 9B, I am repeating, friends, deals with dissolution as well as reconstitution. Now Section 45(4), friends. 45(4), what they have done is, 45(4) basically is the earlier law. Let us come back again, that when the partnership firm used to transfer capital asset to the partner on the dissolution or otherwise, at that time 45(4) became applicable. However, under the new 45(4), friends, when a partnership firm gives any money or capital asset to the partner in settlement of the balance which is lying at his credit, then the partnership firm would have to pay tax in the manner as calculated as prescribed in section 45(4) of the Income Tax Act. And what is the manner of calculation of the liability in section 45(4), friends? The manner they are given by way of a formula, which is A is equal to B plus C minus D. What is A? A is the amount of income chargeable to tax under the head capital gains. That is basically the amount of capital gains. B is what? B is the amount of money received by the partner cash. Suppose I'll give you a concrete example. Suppose if the balance in the hands of a partner was say 1 crore. In the capital account, the balance was 1 crore. And that 1 crore was paid to the partner in the form of cash as well as in the form of capital asset. Then cash is B. A is equal to B plus C minus D. B is cash which is being given. C is the value of the fair market value of the capital asset which is being given. So B plus C means cash plus fair market value of the capital asset, both taken together, minus D. D is the amount represented in the capital account of the partner. So in the example which I gave you, if the balance in the capital account of a partner is 1 crore, and suppose if you are giving him 50 lakhs cash and a capital asset, the market value of which is, fair market value of which is 75 lakhs, then 75 lakhs plus 50 lakhs will become 1 crore 25 lakhs. So you are paying him 1 crore 25 lakhs in place of 1 crore capital account balance. So therefore 25 lakhs will be your capital gain chargeable under section 45(4) of the Income Tax Act. This is the manner of calculation which has been provided, friends. And one more thing they have said, that while calculating the capital account balance, 1 crore balance which I told you, if it contains any revaluation, if any amount is credited to the capital account of the partner on account of revaluation of any asset, then that amount will be ignored while calculating the value of D. It will not include any amount on account of revaluation of any asset or an account of self-generated asset or goodwill. It will not include any amount while calculating this amount of capital gain to which firm is chargeable to tax in respect of though income. This is really income of the partner, not the firm. Because when you are giving the partner, say in satisfaction of his balance lying in his capital account, if you are giving any amount in excess of the amount to which he is entitled as per the capital account, then that should be income of the partner. But that is being made to be paid by the partnership firm, friends, under section 45(4) of the Income Tax Act. And one thing they have rightly done, as one more thing, that 45(4) and 9B will work simultaneously. So what does that mean? Suppose under the 9B, if a capital asset is given, as I told you earlier, that when a capital asset is given to the partner, then the partnership firm is liable to pay the tax on the fair market value of the capital asset minus the cost under section 9B of the Income Tax Act. Now the same capital asset is included here also in the case of 45(4). So to the extent of capital gain tax which has already been charged to tax under section 45(4), that will be excluded while calculating the amount which the firm is liable to pay under section 9(b) of the Income Tax Act. This extra exclusion while calculating the capital gain is what is being provided in section 48 of the Income Tax Act by way of a amendment. These are the major changes, friends, which has been made as far as the manner of taxation of a partnership firm is concerned. Though here I will like to point out, friends, that one thing which still continues, which is not getting affected by this amendment, is the position when a partner assigns his right in the partnership firm to a third party without the firm getting affected in any manner. Because you see, my right in a partnership firm is also an assignable right. I can transfer that right to another person. Though you must have seen in the partnership firm, in the partnership deed, we write that such and such Ramesh Kumar Patodia, son of such and such, party of the first part, which shall include his successor and assigns. So therefore, why that is written, friends? Because I have the right of assignment of my interest in the partnership firm to any XYZ. Of course, unless the partnership deed expressly prohibits the right of assignment, I can assign my right to anybody XYZ by say in the earlier example itself, suppose my capital account balance in the partnership firm is 1 crore. So I value my partnership, I value my the interest in the partnership firm at say 1.5 crores. So I can assign that right to any XYZ by saying that, by entering into agreement of assignment, that I will transfer you my interest provided you pay me 1.5 crores. That is very well possible. Assignment can be done. In this case, firm is not concerned, because the person to whom I have assigned my interest, he will ask the firm that, look, I have bought his, I have been assigned this interest, so you please include myself in this partnership. So that transaction, I think, is not covered by this, because the firm is in no manner doing anything. Firm is not transferring any capital asset. Firm is not giving any money to the partner. In its book, only the name is changing. That's all. No financial repercussion is happening. Though I think litigation is not ruled out in such a situation also, friends. So, and recently there was a Gujarat High Court decision, friends, hardly 3-4 days ago, where Gujarat High Court said that on assignment of in that case, what happened? The partnership firm owned the leasehold land, which was registered in the name of the partners. And one of the partner on retirement assigned his interest to another partner. And the question came up that whether on assignment of interest there was any capital gains. And the Gujarat High Court, under the, of course, under the old law, ruled that no, there cannot be any question of any capital gain tax in that case. But I think in the light of the changes which has now been made, that reasoning may not be applicable, friends. So this is as far as the partnership firms are concerned, friends. Now, another amendment which has been made in the calculation of the slump sale, friends. Very important amendment has been made. Under the present provision, there is no deeming kind of a provision that under the, as all of you know, slump sale is dealt with by section 50(b) of the Income Tax Act, where it's a way of reorganization of business, where the lot of companies have been selling their undertakings and without values being assigned to each and individual assets, and where all of us know that undertaking, if it is more than 3 years old, then it is treated as long-term capital asset. The capital gain on sale of long-term asset, and otherwise it is short-term asset. And the manner of calculation is also prescribed, that in case of depreciable assets at the rate of WDV, and in case of other assets at book value. This is the way it is recorded, friends. But now the change which has been done, friends, is for deeming the consideration in case transfer of capital asset is there as part of slump sale, by deeming the fair market value of the capital asset to be the transfer consideration rather as a result of slump sale. And that is a backdoor kind of a amendment which has been made, friends. And I think the law which is being amended in this manner is basically they are trying to address each and every issue, and this will of course lead to issues in the reorganizations, because slump sale was a beneficial provision. Basically, it was aimed at the main purpose was reorganization of undertakings. But in now when you are trying to bring in the concept of section 56, basically that fair market value of the capital asset, and then of course when they make the rules, etc., they will bring in the concept of the stamp duty value into it also. So this is another silently this amendment has been made, friends, in section 50B of the Income Tax Act. Then, friends, I will briefly touch upon the provisions of reassessment which has been made, though there are not many changes as far as the amendments made by the Lok Sabha, so to say, is they have only clarified the meaning of the asset, which they have said that in case the reopening is done after 3 years, then the asset means land and building or cash balance, etc., that they have specified. But there also, I think it is a misnomer, because it says assets include. So it is an inclusive definition. It is not an exclusive definition. So one must not think that these are the only assets which must be there. It's an inclusive definition, and inclusive definitions are always held to be very wide, and there can be a lot more other things, friends. The manner in which the reassessment will be done from 1st of April 2021, leaving aside the notices which has been issued under the old law, under the old law also, lot of notices have been issued, and lot of notices are being issued by virtue of the notification which has been recently issued, I think on 31st March, when everybody was waiting for extension of time for filing of return. And in return, rather, we were given extension of time for issuing notice under section 148 of the Income Tax Act. To what extent that notification is a valid notification, because the earlier amendments which were made by extending the date of issuance of notice was done through an ordinance, and the present extension which has been done through a notification in pursuance of a delegated legislation, to what extent it can be done through a delegated legislation is something I think will subject matter of challenge across the country. There are a lot of people are already furious. Let us see what happens. But as far as the new provisions of the reassessment are concerned, the time limit, of course, is now 3 years. Though the ultimate time limit is 10 years in certain cases. And one good thing that has been done is that there have been multiple checks which has been laid down in section 148A of the Income Tax Act, that the assessing officer, not only at the time when he wants to make an inquiry for the purpose of issuing a notice under section 148, he has to take the approval of the specified authority under section 151. But he has to take the approval for the purpose of issuing even a so-called notice, calling for the information from the assessee, and also for the purpose of issuing the final notice under section 148 of the Income Tax Act. So I think the 3-level check has been prescribed under the new law, where the approval under the under section 151 will have to be taken by the officer prior to issuing the notice under section 148 of the Income Tax Act. So what does that mean, friends? The earlier law which was laid down by Honorable Supreme Court in the case of GK and Drive Theft as reported in 259 ITR, which was not placed anywhere in the statute book, is virtually now being placed in the statute book itself, where the assessing officer, before issuing the notice under section 148, has to give you a so-called notice that, look, I have this information on the basis of which I want to reassess your income, and you can give your objections to that. And after considering your objections, he will then communicate you the order on objection, and he will then issue a notice under section 148 with the approval of the authority under section 151. So, and the information also is at present kept limited, though much details are not very huge details are not there in the public domain. What they are saying is that the information means such information in accordance with the risk management strategy as formulated by the it says any information flagged in the case of the SSC for the relevant assessment year in accordance with the risk management strategy formulated by the board from time to time. That is one information as per explanation 1 to section 1, new section 148. And secondly, any final objection raised by the Comptroller and Auditor General of India to the effect that assessment in the case of the SSC has not been made in accordance with the provisions of the Act. So now the audit objection can be the subject matter of information. Even though all of us know 119 ITR Indian Express and Newspaper Society as well as 237 ITR Supreme Court PVS Bedi's case, where it is not in all cases of audit objection that reassessment was held to be justified. But now in the new dispensation, if the CAG audit reveals that the assessment has not been completed in accordance with the assessment provisions of the Act, then that can also be an information. In those cases, friends, it can be a ground for issuance of notice up to 3 years, not beyond 3 years. And of course, if a search is conducted after 1st of April 2021, then that can be a ground for reassessment, because as of all of you now these changes were made by Finance Bill itself. So these are in public domain for fairly large, almost I think 7, 8, 10 weeks. So search provisions are now done away with and have been incorporated in the reassessment provisions itself. What I believe, friends, that it is a precursor to faceless reassessment, because as of now, the reassessment proceedings were not being conducted in a faceless manner because the concept of reason to believe was there. But now that entire concept has been changed. So it is a precursor to faceless reassessment. And also, I feel that now the search assessment are being conducted by the central charges, which is not faceless, which is physical, but it is also a precursor to faceless search assessments. The role of the search party will end upon formulation of the appraisal report, I think, and forwarding the material to the faceless team. Maybe in few months' time, we will have that also. This is my personal belief, friends. And then the survey also, one important amendment which has been made by the finance minister in the Lok Sabha as compared to the budget which was presented, friends, is regarding the search and survey that could also have been the ground for reassessment. So far as survey is concerned, if the survey is on account of TDS or is on account of any, say, if any marriage is being held and any survey is done at the time of marriage to find out the expenses, etc., those two grounds have been excluded as being eligible for issuance of notice under section 148 of the Income Tax Act without compliance of the relevant provisions, friends. Otherwise, friends, the mechanism which I told you, that the 3-level check has been provided, that has been made not applicable in case of the search. If a search has been conducted, then there is no requirement of that 3-level check, and the assessing officer in that case will issue the notice under section 148 of the Income Tax Act straight away without any approval. That is the law which has been laid down, friends. There are other changes as well, but since the time is not there, I think they are not, they cannot be discussed. Other than this, friends, there are a few changes also made in the final bill which has been passed, but I am not discussing them because I don't find them to be that important as compared to the original amendments which were made in the finance bill, friends. So, friends, I will stop my deliberations now. Thank you, friends.
Thank you so much, Priya. Vikas ji.
Yes.
I received some questions on my WhatsApp. I first just covered that one, then after you may start one by one. Around 50 questions there on the chat box.
Okay.
रमेश भैया, well described. एक चीज आपने बहुत अच्छी बताई कि जो फॉर्म 10 भरते हैं तो उसमें आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस उन्होंने लगाया है, तो कोई भी कॉलम या कुछ भी पॉइंट गलत भरते हैं तो ऑफ कोर्स इट विल बी कॉट. तो उस पॉइंट पे क्वेश्चन आया है सर कि 1956 एक्ट के अंदर में यदि किसी ने कंपनी बनाई है, सेक्शन 8 कंपनी बनाई है फॉर द चैरिटेबल पर्पसेस, तो होपफुली कि उसमें बहुत सारे क्लाउजेज उस ढंग से नहीं रखे गए होंगे जिस ढंग से रखने चाहिए. तो आपका क्या एडवाइस है कि उसे चेंज करना चाहिए या फिर अपने अप्लाई के टाइम में जरूरत नहीं पड़ेगी?
No, I think if the memorandum of association is not in compliance with the latest provisions, then it is advisable to make changes in the memorandum of association immediately. And after making changes, only the application should be made, in my opinion. Otherwise, the commissioner has got a specific power that if it is not in compliance with the laws, then he can reject the application. So it is better that we make the amendment and then apply.
Second question है भैया कि भी सेक्शन 135 ऑफ कंपनी एक्ट 2013 कॉर्पोरेट सोशल रिस्पांसिबिलिटी के अंदर में अभी नया फॉर्म आया है जिसके अंदर कि यदि कोई भी एनजीओ या कोई भी ट्रस्ट कोई फंड रेज करना चाहती है तो उसे एक CSR 1 फॉर्म जमा करना पड़ेगा. तो इसका कोई इम्प्लीकेशन है कि हमारा जब फॉर्म अप्लाई करते हैं 10A के अंदर में, इधर एनीथिंग कॉम्बिनेशन एनी कोई रिलेशनशिप है क्या?
No, I don't think. Please excuse me. The CSR 1 form which has to be applied under the CSR rules, friends, only applicable those trusts which are registered under section 11, they are only eligible to be registered under the Companies Act, in my opinion. So therefore, before making the application for registration under the Companies Act, you should first make the registration under the Income Tax Act. Then only you will be eligible to get the registration for the CSR purposes, otherwise not. That is the only linkage I see, otherwise there is no linkage as such.
Third question is, what is the difference between NPO and NGO?
NPO and NGO is not, there is no difference as such, because NPO means not for profit organization and NGO means non-government organization. So one difference one can, if minute difference one can say that a NPO, NGO may not be an NPO. So a non-government organization doesn't mean that it is a not-for-profit organization. A private organization is non-government organization. So it may not be a not-for-profit, it may be a for-profit also. But generally NGO and NPO are used interchangeably.
All right. Fourth question is that if any trust want to raise any foreign fund, then what they have to do separately other than the normal compliance of section 11 or 12A or like that?
A trust for the purpose of taking donation from foreign must get itself registered under the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act by making an application under online application is done under the Ministry of Home Affairs website. It should not accept any money. If they accept, it will be a violation of FCRA Act with steep penalties.
All right. Is there an issue if any trust or NGO continue both the charitable activities side by side religious activities?
There is no, it is perfectly in accordance with the law. The only thing is you may not get approval under section 80G of the Act.
Okay. These were the question on my WhatsApp. Now some questions are already on the chat box, which I request Vikas Bathwalji and Bida Saraj to take one by one. विकास अनम्यूट कीजिए.
Yeah. One question from Jayradha Goyal in the chat box is: application in Form 10 is only for existing trust, or the same is also applicable for the new trust?
It is for all the. It is for new trusts also. 10 go on. Then you will find that there are options which are there. You have to select the option meticulously, that which is your option. And as I told you, please spare your valuable time while filling in form number 10A. Don't file it loosely. Please spare most of your time in filling in form. There is one more form 10A. In addition to 10A, they have made one form number 10. Just a minute. 10AB. There is another form which is 10AB. That is applicable once you have been registered. Then again, when you make application for registration, then the form is 10AB. 10A and 10AB, two forms are there. And as compared to the earlier 10G form, which was there for 80G approval, now 10A form takes care of your registration as well as approval under 80G.
Okay, sir. Sir, if a provisional is some way, one question from Binod Kumar Bankaji: if you have started activity by taking provisional registration, then whether we should apply immediately for regular registration or not?
After taking provisional registration, you can continue your activity for 6 months, not beyond 6 months. If you started your activities within 6 months of that, you have to apply for the regular registration.
Okay. Yeah, one another question from Sunil Ganeriwalji is whether registration of trust deed is compulsory or notarized trust deed is okay for registration of trust.
Registration of trust is not compulsory unless the trust deed involves any immovable property. If any immovable property is a part of the trust deed, then according to Registration Act of 1908, anything in excess of 100 rupees is required to be registered. So if there is no immovable property as a subject matter of trust, there is no requirement of registration. Not even notary is also not required.
Okay, sir. Hey, Bidasaria ji. Hello. Bidasaria ji is not available. Okay, sir. One question from Mandiraj Chaudhary: what would be the status of 80G registration till the time of registration is granted after application? Are the trust eligible for accepting donations? You have already discussed this.
Approved under 80G. If you are already approved under 80G and application under the new provisions, then it is the commissioner has the commissioner doesn't have any power to do anything but to grant you the continuation of the approval. So therefore, you are likely to get the approval and you can continue. But I will advise that since the law is now provided timelines and all, it is better that once you make the application, you wait for the document in hand and then issue the certificates and all.
That in relation to this, one question is more that what will be the position of the institution in case the registration is not granted or cancelled? Whether it will be treated as other business entity or will be continued as charitable institution as per trust deed?
Registration is not granted, then,
Yes.
then you have mechanism for filing appeal under section 253 of the act to the income tax appellate tribunal. You can make an appeal, you can file an appeal and challenge the rejection. However, if you don't want to challenge the rejection and if you feel that the rejection was okay, then you can continue yourself as an entity, and then the normal income tax provisions will apply where your income excluding the expenses will be treated as income and you will be assessed and most probably as an association of persons.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, apart from this, one question from Anil Bandewala ji, just if depreciable assets are transferred to partners on WDV value, whether capital gain is applicable if block still exists?
If depreciable asset is
Transferred to partners on WDV value, whether capital gain is applicable
yes,
if block still exists?
if the depreciable asset which is being transferred, if the fair market value of the asset is more than the value at which it is transferred, then the capital gain will be applicable.
Applicable.
Yes.
Yes. Sir, one question from Rupesh Churiwal. If entire capital in capital account is settled through cash or bank, then what will be the situation for tax in the hands of firm or pro partner?
If the entire capital account is settled through cash or bank, that is, say, as I gave the example, suppose my balance in my capital account is 1 crore and I am given check of 1 crore only, then there is no question of any tax.
Sir, is deduction the ATG is allowed only on receipt basis? Yes, sir.
Of course, unless
Yes,
you,
of course. Yes, sir.
unless you have received the money, how can it be on accrual basis?
Basis. Yeah.
The money must come to me, then only I am eligible to issue the certificate. It is, I cannot issue the certificate of ATG unless I have received the money.
Sir, one Sumit Modi had asked for whether Form 10A is to be filed twice, one for ATG and other for 12A.
Good question. Yes, you have to select first option for 11 and second option for ATG.
Sir, Rashmi Sharma has one asked, what is the remedy if one of the two trustees is dead and the return for 1920 is not filed?
One of the two trustee is dead.
Yeah.
And return for 1920 is not filed.
Yes.
If the return has not been filed, it is now barred by limitation.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with the trustee. Even if the trustee, one of the trustee had died, one of the trustee was there, he should have filed the return. So, but now that the return cannot be filed, there is no way unless 148 is done.
Okay. Sir, almost all the questions. Sir, almost all the questions have been done.
Two more questions are visible at the chat box.
Yeah, please continue.
First is from Binoji Khetan. Binoji Banka. If having 12A and 1023C, what will happen?
So, if you are having 1023C, you have to follow the same procedure. They have made identical changes in 1023C. They have made identical provisions in 1023C, 80G and 11. So 1023C also you have to make the file the forms in the identical manner as I told you.
One question has been raised by Anup Ji Sanghai. He is writing that, Ramesh Ji, what will happen to those trusts where there is brought forward over spending of earlier years and now after no set off allowed during current year or subsequent years? Will it now be dead?
The law is not very clear that whether this will setting of the excess expenditure will be prospective or retrospective. So basically, Anupji, query is if it is held to be retrospective, then the earlier spendings will not be allowed. I think this should not be. If it should work only prospectively, that from now onwards, if I have excess spent, then it must not be eligible.
Sir, one question received on my WhatsApp right now by KK Agarwal ji, Senior Chartered Accountant. There is a religious trust registered under section 11, but not having ATG and does not need ATG. Not having ATG and doesn't need ATG. Only form 11A is required, or any other form is also required?
No, if you don't want ATG, then only you have to file that form number 10A. That's all. And you mention that you are a religious trust and you will be given the registration. That's all.
Okay. One question I can see on the chat box is from Dev Kothari ji.
Yes, yes.
Institutions availing benefit under section 1023C, separate IIAD and IIAE. Schools or hospitals having received up to 1 crore, now 5 crore. Is they also required to file for registration with effect from 1st April 21 age? They do not have any registration required. They get direct benefit under section under the section
1023C, 3A, D, and 3AE.
Yeah.
I think I will have to check, but I think they are also required. I will have to check at this point.
Okay.
And here, let me clarify one thing which I did not clarify, that one amendment which they have made is in the final budget is earlier they had the language in 1023C, 3A, D and E was hospital or institution. What that meant, that suppose if a trust had multiple hospitals, say if I have 5 hospitals, and then each of the hospital could have enjoyed a limit of 1 crore. But instead of that, now they have made it a person. They have said that a person. So that effectively means that the limit of 5 crore is a limit to that particular organization, which may be having, say, multiple hospitals or multiple educational institutions running into it, under it. So they have capped it. That amendment has been made. And I think registration is a requirement. Yes.
Sir, one question is that can a settler be a trustee also?
Yes, definitely. No doubt about that.
One question is from 148, section 148. Under what condition 148 notice can be issued beyond 3 years? It is very confusing. Question raised by Pawan Kumar Patodia ji.
You are right, sir, that the provisions of section 149 of the Income Tax Act basically deals with the issuance of notice beyond 3 years up to 10 years. And in my opinion, the provisions of 149 is only an enabling provision. The charging provision, so to say, is section 147 and 148. So when you are not provided for the time limits in the charging section, rather only you are provided for the time limit in the procedural section 149, this is not correct, I think. And this will definitely be a subject matter of challenge whenever the notices are issued beyond 3 years, that this charging section needs to have a provision like this. Though 149, one good provision which has been made by them is that for the notices which are issued after 1st of April 2021, in respect of the period before 1st of April 2021, the limits as prescribed in the earlier law, that is 6 years limit, will apply, not the 10 years. So to that extent, these are beneficial provisions, but I think while implementing the 10-year law, there will definitely be issues.
Hello.
There are no
Sir, one question from Jayradha Goel. Whether the consideration received on assignment of right will tax as capital gain. In that case, the revaluation amount will be the part of cost or will be deduction from capital balance.
if the consideration on assignment is received by a partner from any XYZ person who is not connected with the firm has got nothing to do. Suppose in the example which I gave you, my capital account balance was 1 crore and I have agreed with a person XYZ that I will assign you my interest for 2 crores. Then that person is giving me 2 crore, firm has got nothing to do. So in my hands, of course, it will be a transaction which is liable for capital gain tax because I have received excess 1 crore. But in the hand, it has got no tax implications in my opinion.
Okay. Sir, one Anand Matkara has asked, when a proprietorship firm is taken over by a private limited company, whether slump sale will be applicable.
Unless it is a transaction of slump sale as per section 50C, and because slump sale is applicable for transfer of undertakings. Unless there is an undertaking, the provisions of section 50C will not apply. The proprietorship firm is not an undertaking as such. So that will not be a slump sale, I think.
Okay, sir.
Achha, one question is from Raj Rungta. He's just saying that what accounting method is advisable for trust, whether case or mercantile or mixed age. Sometimes you need to book interest on FD on mercantile basis to claim TDS.
I think I always clients to mercantile basis of accounting, because cash basis of accounting mismatches and 85% criteria on sometimes it becomes very difficult. Mercantile basis better in my opinion.
Sir, we have covered roughly more than 25 questions. Only 2 participants raised their hands, Sumit Modi and Anand Ji Maskara. Please, ask your questions. Sumit Modi ji and Anand Maskara ji. Sumit Modi and Anand ji Maskara. Perhaps they are not on the system right now. Now I hand over the proceedings back to Vivek Banka ji for formal vote of thanks.
Okay.
हेलो, आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
Yes.
Yes, आवाज आ रही है. Yes, please.
सर, सुमित मोदी बोल रहा हूँ.
हाँ जी, बताइए.
मुझे जो 80G ग्रांट हुआ था वो 80G 5 सब क्लास 6 में ग्रांट हुआ था विद अप्रूवल ऑफ कमिश्नर. लेकिन अभी 12A का फॉर्म, ये 10A का फॉर्म में देख रहा हूँ, इसमें सब क्लॉज 6 का तो ऑप्शन ही नहीं है. 80G 5(1) है, 80G 5(4) है. तो कैसे फाइल होगा सर?
There must be 6 has been incorporated and some different provision. I'm not very, but it has to be there. 80 clause, sub clause 6.
80G 5(1) और 4 का लगा
The committed.
Hello.
हेलो,
अनिल भैया.
हाँ. हेलो.
आप क्वेश्चन पूछे अनिल भैया.
रमेश जी,
सर,
अगर डिप्रिसिएबल एसेट्स हम लोग ट्रांसफर कर रहे हैं और ब्लॉक एग्जिस्ट है तो कैपिटल होगा कैसे उसमें? वो तो ब्लॉक से लेस हो जा रहा है.
this is the transfer. It talks about
ऑडियो नहीं है.
सर ऑडियो कट रहा है.
नॉट ऑडिबल.
अभी कट रहा है. हेलो.
ये आवाज किसकी आ रही है बैकग्राउंड में? उसको थोड़ा म्यूट कर दीजिए ना.
सुमित मोदी का था.
हाँ, अब अनुज जी बोलिए.
what I was a very good question, that when a capital asset is transferred and it is going out of the block of the asset, depreciable asset basically, then ordinarily under the transfer of asset will have to be deducted and only the depreciation will be reduced. But here what is happening, it all depends on whether the fair market value of that particular asset which is transferred is in excess of the value at which it is recorded or not. There may be cases where the fair market value of that particular depreciable then like example, in case of a leasehold land which is eligible for amortization, leasehold land is amortization is eligible. So in that case, the market value of that leasehold land may be much more than the value at which it is existing, and therefore one cannot argue, I think, that in such cases provision will not be applied. And since the provision incorporated in with the basis of at the beginning of my deliberation, that the place where this provision has been inserted, that also has been something deep thought has been given that where this 9B should be inserted. So all those things have gone into it, and in my even not with it is a depreciable asset. In case it goes out of the block, the fair market value of the asset will be liable to be treated in the hands of the firm as capital gain under the new provision.
Thank you,
sir.
Ramesh.
Now, Vivek, please give the formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Vikas. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, audible.
On behalf of BICA, I would like to thank our own CA Ramesh Patadia ji for sharing his view on the major amendment in the Finance Act and the provisions of charitable trust NGO under the new income tax era. Sir, you explained the said topic in a very nice and lucid manner. Really, the deliberation was very informative and interactive, and I am sure it will give the value addition to our professional knowledge. Thanks a lot, Ramesh Bhaiya.
Thank you, Bhaiya.
Announcement 15 May wala.
And thanks to all for joining on the Zoom. Yeah, friends, one important announcement is also here. Our association is going to hold an annual conference, our signature event, on 15th May at ITC Royal Bengal. All are requested to join, and details are shared very soon.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
a
you.
lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Bhaiya. Thank you, Ramesh
Thank
Bhaiya.
you so much.
Thank you.